My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired high school principal. They actually thought they had won. They left me in a cold and sterile room, smelling of bleach, already popping champagne, back at the custom-built estate I spent my entire life working for. My son and his entitled wife were absolutely convinced they had thrown me away like yesterday's garbage and stolen my legacy. But they had no idea about the legal trap they had just walked right into. I sat on the edge of the stiff vinyl bed in a gloomy, low-budget nursing home on the outskirts of the city. The air in that room was heavy, thick, with the depressing scent of industrial disinfectant mixed with boiled cabbage. Across from me stood Jamal, the boy I carried, prayed over, and sacrificed my youth for. He could not even bring himself to look me in the eye. He just stood there, staring down at his expensive Italian leather shoes, shifting his weight from side to side like an absolute coward. Beside him was his wife, Chloe. She was tapping her manicured nails impatiently against the side of her designer purse, looking around the shabby room with a look of pure disgust. I had spent 40 years walking the halls of the toughest high schools in this state, demanding respect and building futures. I put Jamal through college without a single dime of student loan debt, working late nights and summer school, just to make sure he had a head start in this world. And this was my repayment. A dumpy room with peeling paint and a daughter-in-law who could not wait to count my money. Chloe looked right at me with a sickeningly sweet fake smile and uttered the crushing words that still ring in my ears. She said, "It is for your own good, Loretta. Your mind just is not what it used to be." I did not say a single word. I just sat there, my hands shaking in my lap. Chloe looked at my trembling hands and probably patted herself on the back, fully believing she was witnessing the physical decline of a senile old woman. But I was not trembling from dementia. I was trembling from the sheer, agonizing heartbreak of watching my only child throw me away so easily. They turned around and walked out the door, leaving me sitting there with nothing but a cheap plastic suitcase they had packed for me. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. I listened to the sound of their footsteps fading down the linoleum hallway. Once the silence settled in, I wiped the tears from my cheeks. I took a deep breath and my posture straightened. The grieving mother was gone, and the strong woman who commanded respect for decades returned. I reached into my handbag and slid my fingers along the inner lining until I felt the crisp, sharp edge of a specific business card. They truly believed they had outsmarted me. They thought they could strip me of my dignity and my home. But my son and his wife had no clue that by abandoning me here today, they had just activated the very clause that would destroy their perfect little plan. I spent 40 years walking the tiled halls as a principal in one of the toughest school districts in this state. I broke up fights between troubled teenagers, counseled broken families, and worked late into the dark evenings, ensuring my students always had a fighting chance at a real future. But my biggest and most important project was always my son, Jamal. I worked summer school every single year without fail, saving every extra penny I could scrape together, so that when Jamal finally walked across that college graduation stage, he did it without a single dime of student loan debt weighing him down. My husband Calvin and I built a warm and loving home through pure sacrifice. We were never flashy people. We firmly believed in hard work, strong faith, and quiet humility. When Calvin passed away suddenly 10 years ago, my heart broke into a million unfixable pieces. He left me a modest life insurance policy. It was certainly not a massive fortune, but it was enough money to give me a choice in my future. Instead of taking that money and spending it on luxury vacations or designer handbags to numb my grief, I took that payout and I invested it quietly. I bought a few rundown duplexes on the edge of town, fixed them up with my own 2 hands and some local contractors, and rented them out to good families. Over the years, I brilliantly rolled those monthly profits into more local real estate. By the time I officially retired from the school district, I had built a very lucrative and silent empire. But I kept my wealth a complete and total secret from everyone. I stayed right there in our same comfortable and unpretentious brick home with the wrap-around porch. I continued to drive the same reliable sedan I had owned for years. I did all of this because I wanted Jamal to build his own work ethic from the ground up. I had seen far too many young men handed the world on a silver platter, only to completely lose their drive and their character. I wanted my son to be a man who worked hard for what he had. A man who respected the true value of a hard-earned dollar. I honestly thought I was protecting him from the corrupting power of unearned money. I had no idea I was simply delaying the inevitable heartbreak that was waiting for me. The shift in my son did not happen overnight. It walked right through my front door wearing expensive designer heels and smelling of overpriced perfume. Her name was Chloe. When Jamal married her, he brought a deep and unsettling sense of entitlement right into the sacred center of my family. Chloe was a woman who evaluated the worth of people strictly by the brand of their shoes and the zip code of their home address. At first, the disrespect was slow, almost wrapped up in a fake politeness. During our Sunday family dinners, she would make these subtle and sharp little jabs about my clothes and my lifestyle. She would look at my classic church suits and ask if I ever thought about updating my wardrobe to something from this decade. I would just smile politely and pass the green beans, completely refusing to let her steal my joy or provoke an argument in my own home. But then I noticed my own son, Jamal, changing right before my eyes. The respectful and patient boy I raised started huffing loudly and rolling his eyes whenever I asked him to help me fix a leaky faucet or look over a complicated piece of mail. He became noticeably impatient, treating my home and my presence like a heavy burden rather than a safe sanctuary. Then came the true disturbance to my peace. Chloe started bringing her older brother Trent to my Sunday dinners. Trent was a slick and smooth-talking white American man who worked as a real estate broker and a notary public. He wore cheap cologne and suits that were just a little too tight for his frame. From the exact moment Trent stepped onto my porch, his eyes were constantly darting around the property, calculating and assessing every inch. He did not care about the beautiful history inside my home. He only saw giant dollar signs. Over a plate of my smothered chicken and collard greens, Trent would lean across my dining room table and ask the most incredibly intrusive questions. He would constantly bring up the rapidly rising property values in my specific neighborhood. He would ask exactly how much square footage I had on the lot and whether I found the wooden stairs too difficult to manage at my advancing age. He spoke to me very slowly and overly loud acting, as if my age had somehow severely dulled my intellect and my hearing. Chloe and Jamal would just sit there, eating their food, nodding right along with Trent as he casually suggested that aging widows should really liquidate their valuable assets and let the younger generation handle the heavy financial lifting. I sat quietly at the head of my table and watched them exchange those greedy and knowing glances right over their glasses of sweet tea. They looked at me and saw a tired old woman sitting on a gold mine, totally oblivious to her surroundings and ripe for the picking. But they forgot one incredibly crucial detail about who they were dealing with. You do not survive 40 years commanding respect as a high school principal by being naive or easily fooled. I saw every single greedy look they shared, and I heard the loud malice in every unspoken word. The shift from subtle disrespect to blatant psychological warfare did not happen overnight. It was a slow and calculated erosion of my peace. It started with small things vanishing from my home. I have always been a meticulous woman. I kept my spare house keys in a hand-painted ceramic bowl right by the front door. One Tuesday, they simply disappeared. A few weeks later, A beautiful vintage pearl brooch that Calvin had gifted me for our 20th anniversary, vanished from my wooden jewelry box. When I asked Jamal if he had seen these items, he sighed heavily, rubbed the back of his neck, and told me I was just getting old and misplacing things. He looked me right in the eye and said my memory was clearly starting to slip. Then the conversations aggressively shifted toward my finances. Jamal would come over, sit at my kitchen table, and complain endlessly about his massive credit card debts. He said he was drowning in high interest rates. He started dropping heavy hints that my house was far too large for one aging widow to maintain. He suggested I downsize to a small apartment and hand over the equity to him so he and Chloe could finally live comfortably. I firmly but gently refused. I told him this house was my sanctuary and he needed to learn how to manage his own budget. The very moment I said no, the gaslighting officially began. They orchestrated a campaign to make me doubt my own sanity. I would leave my reading glasses on my nightstand before bed, only to find them tucked inside the refrigerator the next morning. My mail would mysteriously move from the kitchen counter to the bottom drawer of the guest room dresser. Chloe would call me on a Thursday afternoon, acting furious, asking why I had missed our scheduled lunch date at a downtown bistro. There was never any lunch date planned. I kept a strict calendar on my refrigerator, and I knew for an absolute fact she had never invited me anywhere. But she would speak to me with such condescending pity, telling me she was deeply worried about my cognitive decline. They wanted me to feel crazy. They wanted me to question every thought that crossed my mind. They were actively moving my belongings around to simulate severe memory loss. It was a wicked and cruel psychological game designed to break a strong woman down into a fearful, dependent shell of her former self. But my mind was sharp. I spent 40 years managing a chaotic high school. I knew when I was being played. I just did not understand the full, terrifying scope of their ultimate goal until one rainy Wednesday afternoon. The hard evidence came to me completely by accident. I was attending a Wednesday afternoon women's fellowship at my church, but the building heating system broke down unexpectedly, cutting our meeting short by a full hour. I drove home through the pouring rain, parked my sedan quietly in the driveway, and walked up the steps to my wraparound porch. As I put my key into the front door, I noticed it was already unlocked. I stepped into the foyer and heard voices coming directly from my own living room. It was Jamal, Chloe, and her brother Trent. I stood perfectly still in the shadowed hallway, holding my breath, listening to the most devastating conversation of my entire life. Trent was doing most of the talking. His slick, arrogant voice echoed off the walls of the home Calvin and I had built. He was calmly explaining a legal loophole they could use to declare me mentally incompetent, without needing a rigorous, independent psychiatric evaluation. He told them that with enough documented incidents of my supposed memory loss and a united front from the immediate family, a judge would grant them emergency conservatorship. Chloe let out a sharp and cruel laugh that chilled me to the very bone. She said that once they had me locked away in a nursing home, Trent could fast-track the sale of my property. She bragged about how they would completely take over my pension and drain my bank accounts to fund their lavish lifestyle. I stood there waiting for my son to speak up. I prayed to God that Jamal would defend me, that he would throw Trent out of my house for daring to suggest something so evil. Instead, the voice that responded broke my heart forever. Jamal sighed loudly and said he was simply tired of waiting for his inheritance. He complained that his debts were suffocating him, and that I had lived long enough in absolute comfort while he struggled to keep his head above water. He agreed to the plan. My own flesh and blood gave a greedy white real estate broker permission to steal his mother's legacy and strip away her freedom. The sheer audacity of them sitting on the sofa I bought with my hard-earned money, drinking my coffee, and casually planning my financial and mental ruin was beyond comprehension. They mapped out my entire destruction as if they were discussing what to order for dinner. They spoke about my life, my assets, and my future as if I were already dead and buried. I remained frozen in the dark shadows of the hallway, clutching my chest as the reality of their betrayal set in. The pain was so intense it felt physical, like a heavy stone crushing my lungs. I closed my eyes and pictured Jamal as a little boy. I remembered working double shifts just to buy him new sneakers. I remembered staying awake all night, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth when he was burning up with a fever. I remembered the endless prayers I whispered over him, begging the universe to protect him and guide him into becoming a good, honorable man. The boy I had carried, fed, and protected with every ounce of my strength was sitting just a few feet away, actively conspiring to destroy my mind and steal my entire life's work. A weaker woman might have burst into that living room in a tearful rage. Another mother might have screamed at them, demanding answers, dropping to her knees and pleading for her son to remember the love they once shared. But the tears dried up before they could even spill over my eyelashes. The profound and suffocating grief inside my chest suddenly hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I realized right then and there in that quiet hallway that I could not save a son who had actively chosen greed over his own mother. He had made his choice. He was no longer the sweet little boy I raised. He was a grown, calculating man who was fully prepared to throw me into a sterile facility just to pay off his credit cards. Instead of confronting them and giving them a chance to lie or cover their tracks, I made a silent vow to myself. I quietly turned around and backed out the front door, shutting it without making a single sound. I walked back to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the rain hitting the windshield. I was not going to let them destroy me. I decided right then that I needed to gather undeniable, concrete proof of their wicked scheme. I had to let them think they were winning. I had to play the part of the confused, declining old woman they so desperately wanted me to be. I was going to smile in their faces, nod at their lies, and meticulously build a legal and financial trap they could never escape. They severely underestimated the intelligence of the woman who gave them everything. I was ready to fight back. The very next morning, I woke up before the sun even considered rising over the horizon. The paralyzing weight of my son's betrayal had completely vanished overnight, replaced by a cold and calculating energy. I dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit, the one I used to wear when facing down difficult school board meetings. I drove downtown to the imposing glass building that housed the law firm of Mr. Sterling. He was a fierce, sharp-suited attorney who had handled my late husband Calvin's affairs for decades. He was a man who respected loyalty above all else. I sat across his polished mahogany desk and laid out exactly what I had heard in my own living room the night before. I told him about Trent's plan to declare me incompetent, and Chloe's eager laughter at the thought of draining my pension. Mr. Sterling listened in absolute silence, his jaw tightening with every word. When I finished, he took off his glasses and told me that what my family was planning was not just deeply immoral, but a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. I told him I did not just want to defend myself, but I wanted to build a fortress so impenetrable they would break their own teeth trying to bite into it. He smiled a very dangerous, knowing smile, and we immediately got to work on a brilliant legal maneuver. Over the next few hours, we meticulously placed every single one of my assets into an irrevocable blind trust, my bank accounts, my pension directives, the investment portfolio I had grown in secret, and the commercial properties were all locked away completely out of their reach. But the true masterpiece of our meeting involved the luxury condo where Jamal and Chloe were currently living. For the past 5 years, they truly believed they were renting from a strict corporate property management company that graciously allowed them a steep discount. They had absolutely no idea that I was the sole owner of that limited liability company. I had been quietly letting them live there, rent-free, covering the massive overhead out of my own pocket, just to help them get on their feet. Mr. Sterling seamlessly transferred the ownership of that LLC right into the new irrevocable trust, making it completely untouchable. He drafted specific clauses that would automatically trigger severe penalties for anyone attempting to fraudulently claim the estate. By the time I walked out of those heavy glass doors, my life was a legal vault. I had stripped my son and his greedy wife of every single financial thread connecting them to my wealth. The silent preparation was complete, and the legal trap was armed and ready to snap shut. Now I just needed to give them the bait. Returning to my house, I immediately shifted into the most difficult performance of my entire life. I had to look into the eyes of the son who was actively plotting my ruin and pretend I was a frail, confused old woman. I began intentionally misplacing items, just like they had been doing to me. I would ask Chloe the same questions 2 or 3 times in a row, staring blankly at the wall. The sheer joy that flashed across her face every time I acted forgetful was absolutely stomach-churning. They swallowed the bait without a single ounce of hesitation, completely convinced their gaslighting campaign was working perfectly. 2 weeks later, the trap deepened when Trent arrived at my home unannounced, carrying a thick stack of manila folders. He strolled into my kitchen with that slick, arrogant grin, reeking of his cheap cologne, and dropped the papers right onto my table. He spoke to me in that disgustingly loud, slow voice, telling me it was just some routine insurance paperwork that Jamal needed me to sign to keep my benefits active. He hovered over me, pointing to the dotted lines like I was a toddler who could barely comprehend the alphabet. My heart pounded with righteous anger, but I kept my hands slightly trembling as I picked up the pen. What Trent did not know was that my attorney had thoroughly coached me for this exact moment. I stared blankly at the pages and slowly signed my name, but I deliberately used the wrong middle initial and altered the slant of my handwriting, creating a legally voiding discrepancy that would instantly invalidate the documents in any legitimate court of law. I handed the papers back to Trent, with a vacant smile playing the helpless victim to perfection. But I was not just sitting there passively letting them mock me. Tucked safely inside the deep pocket of my wool cardigan was a small digital voice recorder capturing every single word spoken in my home. I recorded Trent openly discussing the fraudulent appraisal of my house with Chloe, laughing about how much money they were going to make once they threw me in a facility. I stood quietly by the sink and captured the audio of Chloe, viciously snapping at me when I asked for a glass of water, telling me to shut up and sit down, because my mind was completely useless anyway. Every harsh insult, every cruel command, and every piece of their financial conspiracy was permanently saved onto that tiny device. They paraded around my living room, gloating over the fake power of attorney papers they thought they had just secured. They truly believed I was entirely broken and defeated. But beneath my perfectly acted confusion, my mind was razor sharp. Every time Chloe rolled her eyes, and every time Jamal ignored me, I just mentally added another piece of evidence to their growing pile of guilt. The devastating day finally arrived when they decided to force me out of my own home. This brings me right back to that cold and gloomy nursing home room where this story began. The morning they came to collect me, I did not put up a single fight. I packed my meager belongings into a cheap plastic suitcase they had tossed on my bed. Jamal refused to look me in the eye the entire morning, silently carrying my bag to his car, while Chloe stood on my porch, looking around as if she already owned the place. The car ride to the facility was painfully quiet. I stared out the window, watching the neighborhood I had loved for decades fade away into the distance, feeling a strange mix of profound grief and intense anticipation. When we arrived at the low-budget nursing home, the heavy smell of bleach and boiled cabbage hit me like a physical blow. They walked me down the depressing linoleum hallway and left me sitting on that stiff vinyl bed. Chloe gave me that final, crushing look and told me it was for my own good because my mind just was not what it used to be. Then they turned their backs on me and walked away completely convinced they had secured their grand victory. But the very second the heavy facility doors clicked shut behind them, the frail, confused old woman they thought they had conquered vanished completely. I stood up, grabbed my plastic suitcase, and walked straight down the hallway to the front desk. I smiled warmly at the receptionist, informed her there had been a massive administrative error, and calmly checked myself right out of the facility. I pushed open the double-glass doors and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. Waiting for me right at the curb was a sleek black town car. The rear door swung open, and my attorney, Mr. Sterling, was sitting inside holding a thick leather briefcase. I slid into the leather seat next to him, taking a deep, steadying breath. He looked at me with deep respect and confirmed that everything was going exactly according to our plan. At that exact moment across town, my son, Jamal, was proudly marching into the county courthouse. Armed with the legally void documents Trent had manipulated me into signing, Jamal was officially filing a petition for emergency conservatorship and total control over my estate. He thought he was striking the final blow to take over my finances, my home, and my legacy. He thought his greedy white brother-in-law had paved a golden road for him to walk on. He had no idea that by filing those fraudulent documents, he had just triggered the catastrophic legal trap I had spent weeks carefully building. The setup was absolutely flawless. They had taken the bait, swallowed the hook, and were blindly pulling themselves right into the courtroom showdown that would end their reign of disrespect once and for all. The morning of the hearing arrived with a crisp and biting chill in the air, the kind of morning that wakes you up and forces you to face the absolute truth of your life. I walked through the heavy double doors of the county family court building, flanked by my attorney, Mr. Sterling. The polished marble floors echoed with the sound of my sensible leather heels. I did not come dressed as the broken, confused, and fragile old woman my son and his wife so desperately wanted me to be. I was dressed as the woman who had spent 40 years commanding respect in the toughest school district in the state. I wore my tailored burgundy suit, the exact same power suit I used to wear when facing down hostile school boards and demanding funding for my students. My hair was perfectly styled, and my posture was as straight as a steel rod. I felt a profound sense of righteous anger mixed with a deep, settling peace. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Inside courtroom 4, the scene was playing out exactly as we had anticipated. I waited just outside the heavy oak doors, peering through the small rectangular window. Jamal, Chloe, and her brother Trent were sitting at the petitioner's table dressed to the nines and whispering smugly to one another. Jamal wore a sharp, custom-fitted charcoal suit that I probably paid for, his chest puffed out with unearned confidence. Chloe was practically glowing in a designer beige dress, her expensive handbag resting proudly on the mahogany table in front of her. She was filing her perfectly manicured nails against her thumb, looking around the courtroom as if she had already won the lottery. Trent, looking slick and greasy in a tight navy blazer, was busy organizing a stack of manila folders, completely convinced he was the smartest man in the building. They were presenting their case to Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense magistrate known for his strict adherence to the law. Trent had just confidently submitted the forged medical documents and the fraudulent power of attorney, spinning a tragic, completely fabricated tale about my sudden, severe cognitive decline. He literally stood before a judge and lied, claiming I was wandering the streets and completely incapable of managing my own basic needs. Mr. Sterling gave me a brief, knowing nod, and we pushed the heavy oak doors open. The heavy hinges let out a low groan that cut right through Trent's sickeningly smooth presentation. The entire courtroom turned to look. When Jamal saw me walking down that center aisle, the smug, arrogant smile on his face completely melted away. He actually dropped his expensive pen, the loud clatter echoing in the silent room. Chloe gasped so sharply she choked on her own breath, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Trent froze, his slick demeanor instantly evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. They had left me in that foul-smelling, miserable nursing home just days ago, entirely convinced I was locked away, heavily medicated, and completely neutralized. Seeing me stand there, sharp-poised and radiating authority, sent a visible shockwave right through their bodies. The absolute terror in my son's eyes was palpable. He looked at me, and in that split second, he knew the frail, senile victim they had fabricated did not exist. He knew his mother had returned and she had brought the truth with her. Mr. Sterling smoothly approached the bench, handing a copy of his credentials to the bailiff, before turning his attention to the blatantly forged documents Trent had just submitted. Judge Harrison, who had been studying the papers with a skeptical frown, looked up at my attorney. Mr. Sterling did not waste a single second. With surgical precision, he systematically dismantled every single piece of paper Trent had brought into that courtroom. He pointed out the deliberate legally voiding discrepancy in the signature I had given them back at my house, demonstrating that the document was inherently invalid. He then presented sworn affidavits from 3 independent board-certified neurologists, all declaring that I was in perfect mental health and possessed full cognitive capacity. Trent began to sweat profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, as his entire legal foundation crumbled into dust right before his eyes. Jamal and Chloe sat frozen in their chairs, their faces drained of all color, realizing that their brilliant scheme had been nothing more than a pathetic illusion, but the true devastation had not even begun. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and handed Judge Harrison a thick, heavily bound blue folder. He announced to the court that we were submitting the forgotten document. The judge adjusted his glasses, opened the file, and the courtroom fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Judge Harrison cleared his throat and began to read the contents aloud for the official court record. It was the legally binding, irrevocable blind trust agreement I had established exactly 10 years ago. The judge noted that the trust was completely airtight, but what made Jamal physically flinch was when the judge pointed out the signature on the second page. Jamal had co-signed this very document when he was 28 years old. He had been so self-absorbed, so eager to just sign whatever papers his father and I put in front of him, without reading that he had completely forgotten its existence. Judge Harrison's stern voice echoed off the wood-panelled walls as he read the strict interrerum clause, commonly known as a no-contest clause, embedded deep within the trust. The legal language was absolute and unforgiving. It stated clearly that any heir who attempted to fraudulently claim the estate, or who attempted to declare the grantor mentally incompetent without an independent, court-appointed medical consensus, would immediately and permanently forfeit their entire inheritance. Jamal let out a small, strangled noise. The reality of those words hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. By filing this fraudulent petition today, trying to steal my wealth and strip me of my rights, he had legally triggered the clause. He had just disinherited himself completely. Every single dime he thought he was going to get was gone forever. Before they could even process the magnitude of that loss, Judge Harrison turned the page and revealed the final earth-shattering bombshell. He looked directly at Chloe and Jamal and read the asset declaration of the trust. He stated that the luxury condominium they currently resided in, the home they believed they were renting at a steep discount from a corporate property management company, was entirely owned by a limited liability company that belonged exclusively to my trust. The judge looked over his glasses and informed them that by violating the no-contest clause and attempting to defraud the estate, they had instantly triggered a total forfeiture of their tenancy. They had no legal right to remain on the property. By dragging me into this courtroom to steal my life, they had literally just signed their own eviction notice. They had 30 days to pack up their designer clothes and vacate my property. The courtroom instantly erupted into absolute chaos. Chloe sprang up from her chair, her face twisted in a mask of pure, ugly rage. The polite, sweet daughter-in-law facade vanished completely as she began screaming at Jamal at the top of her lungs. She called him an idiot, a failure, and blamed him for losing the lavish lifestyle she felt she was owed. She shrieked that she had wasted the best years of her life, waiting for a payout that was now legally vaporized. Trent, realizing that he was now officially on the hook for submitting forged documents to a federal judge, tried to quietly slide out of his chair and sneak toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. He ordered the bailiffs to stop Trent, immediately announcing that he was holding him in contempt of court and referring him to the district attorney for severe document fraud and attempted elder financial abuse. The bailiffs grabbed Trent by the arms, halting his escape and forcing him back to the table. Jamal did not scream. He did not run. The weight of his own profound greed finally crushed him. He stumbled away from the petitioner's table and dropped straight down to his knees, right there on the cold marble floor in the middle of the courtroom. The arrogant man who had plotted to lock me away in a facility just hours prior was now sobbing uncontrollably. He crawled toward me on his knees, reaching out with shaking hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my skirt. He begged me for forgiveness, his voice cracking and pathetic as he pleaded with me to undo what had just been done. He cried out that he was my son, that he made a mistake, that he was just stressed about his debts and influenced by bad advice. I looked down at the boy I had loved more than my own life. My heart ached for the beautiful, innocent child he once was, the boy who used to hold my hand and promise he would always take care of me. But the man kneeling on the floor in front of me was a stranger who had looked me in the eye while throwing me into a miserable nursing home just so he could steal my money. I felt the sorrow deep in my bones. But I stood incredibly tall, completely devoid of any weakness. I looked down at him, my voice steady, calm, and utterly chilling as it carried across the silent courtroom. I gave you my whole life, Jamal. But my dignity is not for sale. I did not wait for his response. I did not look back at Chloe's furious tears or Trent's panicked face. I simply turned around my sensible heels, clicking against the floor, and I walked right out of those heavy oak doors. I left them kneeling in the wreckage of their own making, forced to face their financial ruin, their fractured marriage, and their legal consequences entirely alone. As I stepped out of the courthouse and felt the warm sunlight hit my face, I took a deep breath of fresh air. I was finally free. 6 months have passed since that monumental day in the courtroom. I am currently sitting on the wraparound porch of a beautiful new beachfront property I bought entirely for myself. The warm ocean breeze carries a salty sweetness that instantly clears the mind, and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore has become my daily lullaby. I sip my iced sweet tea and look out over the vast expanse of blue water, finally allowing myself to fully process everything that happened. I will not lie to you and say it does not hurt. The pain of losing my only son, of accepting that the boy I raised chose pure greed over my love, is a heavy grief I will carry for the rest of my days. But nestled right alongside that profound sorrow is an undeniable and powerful peace. It is the peace of finally finding myself again, of remembering the strong woman who built a legacy from scratch. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this absolute truth. Blood simply makes you related, but loyalty, respect, and unconditional love are what truly make you a family. You must never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, make you feel like you are a burden or that you are past your expiration date. Your life, your dignity, and your hard-earned legacy belong to you alone. Protect your peace at all costs and absolutely protect your assets. Now, I want to take a moment to speak directly to all of you wonderful listeners out there. If this story touched your spirit today, or if you have ever had to stand incredibly strong against those who actively tried to tear you down, I need you to hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. We are sharing these journeys because there is immense power in our shared experiences, and we need to uplift each other. I would absolutely love to connect with you, so please let me know down in the comments exactly where you are watching from right now and what time it is over there in your corner of the world. I read every single comment, and it brings my heart so much joy to see how far these stories travel and how many lives they touch. Let us continue to build a beautiful global community of strong, wise, and unshakable women who refuse to be silenced or pushed aside by anyone. Share this video with a friend or a family member who might need a reminder of their own incredible worth today. Remember that your strength is your greatest asset, and your peace of mind is your ultimate wealth. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me and for listening to my journey. Until next time, please stay blessed, stay strong, and always stay vigilant.